If you want to make a Hollywood biblical epic film, you have to be a believer to be successful. We are going to talk about this question on the Scott Stedman podcast. Good morning, everybody. It is April 2nd. And we are going to be having a great show today. I do apologize for not having a lot of podcasts out as of late. It has been a very crazy couple of weeks for me with doctor's appointments with my wife since we were expecting our first child, and even just with some things at the church I'm working at, there are some things that came up. So it has been crazy busy for me. So I do apologize, but today we're going to talk about the biblical epic genre and how, especially with the movie Noah coming out last weekend, how that has caused a lot of controversy about these biblical epic films. One of the things that I think is interesting is about the debate is how they look at director Darren Aronofsky, and they say, well, he's an atheist. What is he doing making a movie about Noah? And some have even said because of him being an atheist, that's why the Noah film is not that great. I remember over the weekend we had a free movie ticket that we could from Fandango, and we could see any movie we wanted. And we were looking at this weekend's thing, and it was like, well, there's not really much out. And my wife and I already saw the Muppets Most Wanted movie, so it's like, should we go see the movie Noah? I don't know if we should do that or not. And then I had the idea that, hey, this coming up weekend, the new Captain America is coming up, and even though our free movie gift is expiring, maybe I can activate it and pick a movie for Captain America, and it worked. So my wife was Captain America instead of seeing Noah. So if that makes me a bad pastor, I guess I'm a bad pastor. Anyway, but after the opening weekend for the movie Noah, I was just reading reviews through Fandango. They have things what the critics say and what the fans say, and overwhelmingly, a lot of people were saying no go. You had people who said, they basically started off saying that they were Christian and how this is not according to, the biblical story. There's even people who obviously don't follow faith. They said, hey, I just want to watch this movie just to, watch it, and they didn't even like it either. And then there's some people who did kind of like it, or they thought it was all right. But, overall, there's always that question of if you're making a Hollywood epic movie, especially a biblical epic movie, do you have to be a believer? And again, we don't really know too much about the faith of the directors of movies like Ben-Hur or Samson and Delilah, or even The Greatest Story Ever Told, or even the actors, because obviously, in the real world, where I would think during that time, not every single person who was in Ben-Hur would be a Christian or someone who is a believer. Even though in like the Ten Commandments in Ben-Hur, Charlton Heston starred in those movies, he himself says that he was a believer. So in Christ, so you think about. Does that impact how one plays the role as an actor or a director, how they shoot the film? Well, during that weekend when I was debating, should I see Noah or not, there's this article that came up, and it's about the director, William Friedkin, who actually directed the movie The Exorcist, which is probably one of my top 10 favorite horror movies that I have seen. I think it's a very good movie. And as I am looking through this article, he said that the movie worked, The Exorcist, the movie worked because he made that film as a believer in God, as a believer of Jesus' teachings. And I I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I was kind of reading through this article, and a little bit about him is he says, he doesn't go to a synagogue, he doesn't go to a church, but he really loves the teachings of Jesus that he reads in the New Testament, and it's something that he tries to follow, even though he says it's impossible to follow each of the teachings. At least it's a good idea and moral to live up to, and that's something that he lives up to. And in this article, he was talking about he had a problem in the film with the man who is playing the priest, which would have been Max von Sydow. Which, if you're unfamiliar with Max von Sydow, he was in a lot of great Ingrid Bergman movies. He was in The Seventh Seal, which The Seventh Seal is probably one of my favorite movies. And I just thought Max von Sydow was really good in that film. And here he is playing a priest. And there's this part where he's conducting the exorcism. And he says at the top of his voice, "I cast you out, unclean spirit, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." But when it came to that moment, Max would always freeze up. And he just couldn't say those lines. And eventually, after a couple days of trying to film this take and it just wasn't working, William Friedkin called Bill Blatty, who wrote the book The Exorcist, and he had him watch these takes, and he says, and he's like looking at him, and he's going, "Well, what's the problem?" And Bill Blatty says, "Well, they're awful because he doesn't believe what he's doing." So they were going to rewrite the script to have von Sydow just die in that moment. So when the director went to von Sydow and asked him, "Hey, I'll bring Ingmar Bergman in here to direct the scene with you," and Max von Sydow says, "It's not a matter of Bergman. I just don't believe in God." And Friedkin jokingly says, "But Max, you played Jesus in the greatest story ever told." And Max says, "Yes, but I played him as a man. I didn't play him as the Son of God or a man of God. I played him as a man." And then, of course, that's when Friedkin says, "Well, why don't you just play your priest as a man, just someone who's just trying to do the exorcism, just a sickly priest trying to do his job." And then that was the take that we see in the movie The Exorcist. And I was thinking about that, Max von Sydow being someone who doesn't believe in God. And I was thinking, okay, and especially him playing the role of Jesus in the greatest story ever told. And one of the things as I was reading about Noah and the birth of all these religious films coming out, which, if you don't know, Noah came out probably about a couple months before Noah came out. The movie Son of God came out. And then I think maybe like a couple weeks before Noah came out, the movie God's Not Dead came out. And then in April, the movie Heaven is for Real is coming out in theaters. So we see a lot of these biblical movies coming out. Some of them may not be biblical epics like Noah is to be, but we are starting to see the shift of Hollywood making these Christian movies or these faith-based movies, so that because there's an audience that wants to watch them. And and of course for me, I think it's great, because for me, when I see a lot of Christian movies that are put out by these Christian companies, there's very few that I can actually say that I was a big fan of, or I think, wow, this is a powerful, great movie. Or like the acting was really good. Recently, I ended up seeing a movie called Grace Unplugged, and I watched that movie, and I probably wasn't the target audience because I'm not a young teenage girl who wants to try to be a singer and own a recording studio and be in the music business. But that whole movie I just thought was absolutely bad. Like, I think there was a couple times where I just started to work on other things while I was watching the movie, because I just couldn't sit through this movie and watch it in one sitting and be entertained and moved by this film. So I'm sorry I went on that side note, but I was thinking about the biblical stories, and we're talking about Cecil Cecil B. DeMille and how he produced a lot of these great movies, and probably the one of them would have been King of Kings, which was like this really great biblical epic movie that ended up making a lot of money for Hollywood. Well, the last biblical epic in that 50, 60 region, era where they were very prominent was The Greatest Story Ever Told. And just looking at IMDb, apparently they said that it bombed. So I'm looking at this movie. I'm like, okay, estimated budget to make The Greatest Story Ever Told was $20 million. And it ended up making $8 million. And so obviously that is a failure, because if you spend $20 million on a movie and you only make $8 million, then you're in the hole. And that kind of ended the biblical epics during that time period. And seeing that Max von Sydow played the role of Jesus, and just hearing this interview from Friedkin saying that, oh, well, he just played Jesus as a man and not as the Son of God, does that have an effect on the movie? Is that why the movie bombed so bad? Because, the person who's supposed to play Jesus didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. So, does that play a factor into how to make a great movie? If you're making a biblical epic movie, does your actors, does the director, does the writer, do these people who are part of the film, do they need to be a believer? And even Friedkin, he was saying that's why when you look at like The Exorcist 2 or The Exorcist 3, he says that they're a big pile of excrement films, because the people who made them were not believers. Which is why The Exorcist is so good, because he made it as a believer, and when asked if he was going to make another Exorcist movie, he says, I did it. I couldn't do it any better than that. Because, again, when he made that movie, he did it as a believer. And he made it with conviction and compassion. And he even had a real priest, I guess the sub-priest, who was opposite of Max von Sydow. He was just a regular priest, and, he was a friend of Bill Blatty, the writer of The Exorcist. And Friedkin says, hey, I would like you on the film, and that's how he got the role. So even having a real priest on the set probably helped make that film good too. But I think that's always a good question. Do you have to be a believer to make a good biblical epic film? I guess when you're thinking about that question, especially from a Hollywood perspective, maybe. But then you can look at the Christian films that are put out by Christian producers, Christian directors, have Christian actors in it, and it's basically a Christian-based film, and they're not that great. Or, they may be great for your average churchgoer, but for someone like me who's not only a churchgoer and a pastor, but a artist and an actor and a director and a writer, I can watch that movie and just be like, this isn't good. Like, this is not good. And you just got to think, like, I don't know. It's very paradoxical in a way on, can a film like Noah would the film Noah be better if the writer and director, Darren Aronofsky, if he was a Christian, or if he was a Jew, or if he was even if he was a Muslim, if he was a believer and he wanted to follow the story of Noah that's in the Quran, like, would that make the movie better? I don't know the answer. Obviously, when I look at Darren Aronofsky films, I've only seen a few of his films, but like, I like the movie Pi. I've seen bits and pieces of Requiem for a Dream and don't really understand it, but people tell me they like it and it's good. And then, of course, The Wrestler. I've actually liked the movie The Wrestler too. And then Black Swan won a bunch of awards. So obviously, he's a good director. I mean, it's not like they just had some random first-time director go, hey, we're just going to have you direct this big biblical epic film, and we're going to give you this huge budget to make this movie. they actually got someone who's actually a very good director. But right now, just from what the fans are saying, they don't like the movie. They don't like the movie at all. And obviously, probably when I see it, I'll probably, during maybe my Film for Thought Friday would be the movie Noah when I eventually get around to seeing it. And we'll just see, like, is it actually a good film? Do I think it's a good film? Not based on everyone else's opinion. So I guess that's a question to really think about. Is William Friedkin, in a way, right? Does making a better film that has to do with religion, does it help if you are a believer? Or does that even matter? And I like to hear your thoughts, and obviously you can join in on the discussion on my webpage, thescottstedman.com. We'll post a link on the a discussion link for this this particular topic, and obviously in my notes for the show I'll have the actual article. It's actually a good article. It's from thehollywoodreporter.com, and it does a quick summary, but then they'll go right into the full transcript of the actual conversation. It's actually pretty interesting. Get to learn more about Friedkin's upbringing, what got him into the film industry, and then you'll get to see a more in-depth conversation on his filming of The Exorcist and the him in that conversation with Max von Sydow. So again, it's a great article. I suggest you read it, and then just please join in discussion. Again, you can find that discussion on my webpage, thescottstedman.com. I would like to know what you think. It'd be a great discussion point. Does being a believer in a God, does being a believer make for a better biblical epic film in Hollywood? All right, I'd like to hear what you think. Again, thank you for listening, and I hope to be back next week, hopefully sooner, with another podcast for your listening pleasure. All right, have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye.